The world wants Sri Lanka to be a success story. It has seen the opportunity for lasting success in Sri Lanka, and that is why it has invested so much time and energy into providing that pathway laid down in last October's Human Rights Council resolution. I urge all Sri Lankans to make an effort to understand what that resolution and the report underpinning it actually say, and I urge all those in a position to do so to make a greater effort to explain why the recommendations are so important and why the United Nations and all those individual states, Sri Lanka included, endorsed them. Then perhaps the siren voices who wish to undermine all reforms, all attempts to provide justice, accountability, and reconciliation will get less traction. The people who are trying to undermine confidence in these crucial initiatives are playing a game that is endangering the future peace and stability of this country. For a country to be stable, to be a success, it needs to have a strong, impartial, and credible justice system. The security services and the judiciary must function in the interests of all its citizens. And it was in these areas that the country's key institutions were seriously corroded and corrupted during 3 decades of conflict and human rights violations, including through its reliance on the draconian Prevention of Terrorism Act and other emergency powers. And it is the integrity of these institutions, which depends on having the trust of the population, that the international community is trying hard to help Sri Lanka restore through the implementation of the recommendations contained in the report and in the resolution. Sri Lanka has many excellent judges, lawyers, and law enforcement officials. But over the years, the system they depended on, and which depends on them, became highly politicized, unbalanced, unreliable. The country's history over the past few decades is littered with judicial failures. Virtually all Sri Lankans recognize this, and the Prime Minister commented on it at great length and with admirable candor during a 27th January debate in Parliament. Virtually every week provides a new story of a failed investigation, a mob storming a courtroom, or another example of a crime going unpunished. Sexual violence and harassment against women and girls is particularly poorly handled by the relevant state institutions, especially when the alleged perpetrators are members of the military or security services, and as a result it remains all too widespread. It is for these reasons that the report and the Human Rights Council resolution suggest international participation in the accountability mechanisms set up to deal with international crimes and gross human rights violations committed by individuals on both sides. This is a practical proposal to solve the very real and practical problems I mentioned earlier. But it is only one aspect, albeit a very important one, of the broad range of measures outlined in the 2015 UN report and resolution, and the extent to which it has been allowed to dominate the debate in Sri Lanka in recent days is unfortunate. Extreme nationalistic tendencies lay at the heart of Sri Lanka's conflict, and they should not be allowed to undermine the country's long-term chances of recovery once again. Only a year ago, large numbers of Sri Lankans voted for change, for reconciliation, for truth, for justice. It would be a great shame if a minority of extreme voices on both sides who are bent on disruption are allowed or were allowed to prevail by creating fear where there should have been hope. Sri Lanka needs a serious debate about these very serious issues on which its future depends. This needs to start with a thorough, frank, and honest discussion of the detailed findings of the September 2015 UN report, as it is important that all Sri Lankans rally behind the process and better understand the point of view of all the victims on all sides. The government has shown the will to make great changes, but from the victims in the north and the east and in the east, and also from some of the wisest analysts here in Colombo, I have heard fears that the government may be wavering on its human rights commitments. I was therefore reassured this morning to hear both the President and the Prime Minister state their firm conviction in this regard. But for all that to come to fruition, Sri Lanka must confront and defeat the demons of its past. It must create institutions that work and ensure accountability. It must seize the great opportunity it currently has to provide all its people with truth, justice, security, and prosperity. And I, for my part, will do all in my power to help that come about, and will continue to offer the services of my office to accompany Sri Lanka through this very difficult process.